Constantine the Great is one of the most controversial figures in Western history. To some saintly, or at least a divinely guided emperor whose actions brought the kingdom of God closer to earth. To others, he appears as a man driven by personal ambition, hungry for power and wealth, ruthless both as a ruler and as an individual, willing to eliminate even those closest to him when they threatened his authority. As the victor of the devastating wars of the Tetrarchy, Constantine brought the long crisis of the 3rd century to a definitive end. In doing so, he became ruler of the immensely powerful Roman Empire and by extension, one of history's ultimate winners. His position allowed him not merely to participate in events, but to shape history according to his will. For this reason, any attempt to construct an objective assessment of his morality must first cut through multiple layers of political, religious, and imperial propaganda. In this video, however, we will attempt to present a new image of Emperor Constantine the Great by examining his morality on both a personal and a political level. We'll argue that many of his actions, sometimes in contrast to modern secular beliefs, can in most cases be considered justifiable. To support this approach, we'll begin with a chronological overview of Constantine's life, focusing on his personal life and political decisions. This will be followed by a deeper analysis of the motives and moral implications, evaluated through both Christian and modern philosophical perspectives of his most striking and controversial actions. The execution of members of his own family, his last-minute conversion to Christianity, and his use of Christianity as an instrument of statecraft. Constantine the Great was born within the world of the Tetrarchy, a system developed by Emperor Diocletian in order to administrate the Roman Empire after the devastating crisis of the 3rd century. Within this world, Constantine's father, Constantius, held the position of Caesar of the West, while his mother was a woman named Helena, a Christian Greek from Asia Minor. Christianity at that point would be a well-established faith across the empire, with followers mainly in urban centers. Diocletian, as well as the other two initial tetrarchs, Maximian, centered in Italy, and Galerius, based in the Balkans, would all order persecutions against the Christians with a varying intensity. In order to secure the loyalty of the other tetrarchs, it is highly probable that Diocletian used their sons as political hostages. This was the case for both Constantine and Maxentius, the son of Maximian. The two young men spent many years in Nicomedia, one of Diocletian's palaces, where Constantine had the chance to study Latin, Greek, and philosophy, while also taking part in campaigns against the Sassanids. Despite the fact that Diocletian was said to be preparing Constantine and Maxentius as the heirs to his empire, once the old Emperor Diocletian resigned, also forcing his co-Augustus Maximian to do the same, power came into the hands of Galerius and his two prodigies. The two young men were thus sidelined, and with Galerius now in power, Constantine is said to have escaped to his father in Britain, while Maxentius managed to seize power in Rome with bribes and the help of his supposedly resigned father. Constantius' troops, both Romans and Foederati, got accustomed to Constantine after campaigns against the Picts and swiftly declared him emperor in 306 AD in Eboraku after the death of his father. After assuming personal power, he still conducted campaigns against the Franks that were now raiding the Rhine frontier, until eventually he decided to take part in the wars of the Tetrarchy that were now in full swing. Even though Constantine had married Maxentius' sister Fausta, an excuse for a campaign was found against Maxentius after Constantine executed Maximian, Faustus and Maxentius' father, after the latter threatened to invade him. This might have been a fabrication for a casus belli, but nevertheless Constantine conducted a painful campaign in the north of Italy with 40,000 troops until he successfully reached the vicinity of Rome. There he met Maxentius' army in battle outside of the city at the famous Milvian Bridge, as Maxentius would have feared the loyalty of Rome's citizens towards Constantine during a potential siege. Before the battle, Constantine claims to have had a dream in which the hero, or in other interpretations, a cross was revealed to him. Whether true or not, he used the symbol in order to bolster the morale of his troops and eventually defeat Maxentius, who probably died during or shortly after the battle. After this, Constantine would be the sole emperor of the western part of the Roman Empire and would abolish the Praetorian Guard while curtailing the power of the Senate. Even though not yet Christian, Constantine showed favoritism towards the once persecuted religion, signing, along with Licinius, a trusted man of the now deceased Galerius that ruled over the East, the Edict of Milan in 313 AD. In order to gain complete power over the Roman world, Constantine still needed to defeat Licinius. Both rulers would attempt to initialize a conflict with each other in order to assume absolute control. 316 would mark the year of the start of the civil war between the two Augusti, with Constantine and his sons being victorious in two battles, Civilae and Mardia, which created a stalemate favoring Constantine. The war would spark again in 324 when Constantine scored decisive victories at Adrianople, the Hellespont and Chrysopolis. After this final campaign, Constantine was now the sole emperor of the Roman Empire. Shortly after this victory, he presided over the Synod of Nicaea, a council of bishops from all parts of the empire, even though most of them originated from the east. During the Synod, Arianism was condemned, a popular heresy at the time, which insisted on Christ's human nature over his divine one, and many aspects of the Church as an institution were standardized. The Synod was one of the most influential events of Church history and would define many aspects of the faith for centuries to follow. At this point, it is important to mention the sons of Constantine. Before marrying Fausta, Constantine had another wife, perhaps a concubine, named Minervina, with whom she had his firstborn son, Crispus, in 300 AD, still while being a political hostage. The fate of Minervina is unknown, but it made sense for her to be sidelined for Fausta, as the latter had strong political connections. Fausta and Constantine had three sons, Constantine II, Constantius II, and Constans. This family composition would lead to two of the most questionable actions of Constantine's life, the murder of his son Crispus and his wife Fausta. The possible rationale and morality around those acts will be discussed later. Once he became the total ruler of the Roman Empire, Constantine set out to accomplish one of the most lasting feats under his rule: the establishment of Constantinople on the site of the ancient colony of Byzantium, a great building project for the time that would leave a lasting impact for the following centuries, with the city's foundation being celebrated in 330 AD. Later, he would plan campaigns into Dacia and a final one in Persia, a campaign before which he allegedly planned to officially convert to Christianity by baptism into the River Jordan. This, however, never materialized, as the emperor fell ill, and in 337, near Nicomedia, he summoned local priests and was baptized by Eusebius of Nicomedia, an Arian bishop. After that, Constantine died, leaving behind a legacy of renewal and power, coupled with intrigue and cruelty. For modern secular scholars, the last 2 points are the strongest: intrigue and cruelty. Constantine is often depicted as an autocratic ruler who'd kill anyone just to get in power, a hypocrite who used the matters of faith to his own advantage, and a man who got baptized at the last moment, and even then, this was done by a heretic. But how valid are these allegations? Was Constantine the Great a Christian, or at least a Christian sympathizer? Constantine's personal beliefs cannot be objectively determined. On the one hand, it is highly probable that his mother may have influenced his religious beliefs from a young age, as she herself was a Christian. On the other hand, Constantine can be perceived as a pagan since he used pagan symbolisms even after his vision at the Milvian Bridge. Even if we hypothesize that he did change his faith later on in life, could the move have been purely political? Christians would have still been a minority by the early 300s, but the growing trend of Christianity was obvious. Especially urban centers would have had large Christian populations with whom the emperor may have wanted to build trust, as they would be the ones aiding the administration in the long run. Since his own beliefs may remain undetermined from his combined pagan and Christian sympathizing actions, the political motives cannot be ruled out. One thing remains to be examined: Constantine's letters. Several letters that the emperor sent out are recorded and transcribed by Eusebius of Caesarea in his work Vita Constantini. Even though a non-propagandist, it is widely accepted that Constantine did send out these letters. First, in his letter to Alexander of Alexandria and Arius, dated from the 320s, he tries to mend the theological dispute caused by the teachings of Arius using a highly Christian language, praising God while at the same time mentioning his sorrow for the Arian dispute, which seems to have been caused by quote-unquote insignificant differences. Another letter directed towards Eusebius of Caesarea congratulates the receiver basically on his explanation of the mystery of Easter, showing deep feelings of Christian piety. Quote, "These gods I confess that I hold in unceasing honor and remembrance. These gods I delight to contemplate with pure and guileless thoughts in the height of his glory." End quote. Next, in one more letter, he commissions the writing of 50 Bibles to be used by the Bishop of Constantinople in churches around the city. Nevertheless, despite the actual sincerity of this action, can this favoritism towards Christianity be characterized as a moral action, even if the motives were fully political? Based on the concept of utilitarianism, an action would need to produce the greatest overall well-being to be considered moral. In that regard, we should examine the overall well-being during the pagan and Christian years of the empire. Ancient Roman and Greek societies functioned on a different value system than later medieval society. They valued glory and adventure, as is the case for the Greek civilization under the influence of the Iliad and the Odyssey, or tradition and obedience to the state, as was the case with the Romans. Instead, Christianity would value humility first, and along those lines, it would also promote better conditions for women and marginalized groups like slaves. As mentioned in Galatians 3:28, the kingdom of God belongs to all, slaves and women included. This shift would have a slow but lasting impact on society, creating a more tolerable world for the general population. Additionally, the Christian persecutions, whose scale is still contested, were also halted with the Edict of Milan, leading to less overall religious violence, at least on that front. One final thing to be mentioned regarding Constantine's favoritism towards Christianity is that Christianity was only one of the many alternatives at the time. Manichaeism, Mithraism, or several Christian denominations that were deemed as heretical by the official church all had great following and demographic prospects. However, none of them won the heart of Constantine in the end, as the word of Jesus did. One of the darkest pages in Constantine's life is the murder of his son with Minervina, Crispus, and the murder of his second wife, Fausta. Great mystery surrounds those executions, as both Lactantius and Eusebius of Caesarea, the main biographers of Constantine, do not offer more details on the matter. However, there is a source giving further insight: Zosimus. Zosimus lived 1 century after the death of Constantine, making his accounts less reliable, but at the same time he was a pagan, one of the last of his kind, and he would try to paint a dark picture of Christianity as a whole. That is not the case for Constantine, as he gives a concrete explanation for the reasons behind their murders, painting a better picture for him instead. According to Zosimus, Fausta accused Crispus of forcing himself upon her. Constantine, believing her, ordered the execution of his son. However, it was also proved that Fausta had framed Crispus, and thus Constantine also ordered her execution. This course of events does make sense, as Fausta would not have wanted for Constantine's other son to inherit the empire over her own children. It also makes sense for Constantine to act in such a way based on the morality of the era. If the accounts of Zosimus aren't true, why would he act in such a way for his son and wife otherwise? Could they have been a threat to his power in any other way? Even though this cannot be determined today, it would not make much sense to have ordered the murders to gain more power. Additionally, both Crispus's and Faustus' names were subjected to damnatio memoriae by Constantine, a classical Roman practice aimed at erasing a person from history. Damnatio memoriae means the previous mentions of that person in coins, official documents, or statues are destroyed, essentially erasing this person from history altogether. This would be standard practice for Constantine, even if he had killed Fausta unjustifiably. However, it seems that none of her three sons decided to bring back her memory, perhaps because of her dark past. But even if the allegations are indeed true, should those murders be considered justified? In the traditional Roman point of view, yes. The legendary Lucretia has committed suicide after her honor was spilled by King Tarquinius, seen as a valorous act at the time. While the quote, "Caesar's wife must be above suspicion," referring to a scandalous incident regarding Caesar's wife, as well as many other examples from Roman tradition, show how these incidents should be dealt with in the eyes of the Romans. Many would claim that Constantine's baptism was an action in itself hypocritical, since he only pursued it at the end of his life. On the contrary, it was very common for people to perform their baptism at a later age, like Ambrose of Milan, Saint Augustine of Hippo, or Gregory of Nazianzus. Additionally, Constantine stated that he wanted to be baptized in the Jordan River and may not have had the chance to do so before dying. However, one more question remains open. Was Constantine baptized by a heretic? And if so, is his baptism valid? Eusebius of Nicomedia seems to have been an Arian or an Arian sympathizer based on his stance at the Council of Nicaea, so it can be safely assumed he was a person of suspicious beliefs for the official church. However, regarding the baptism itself, both modern Catholic and Orthodox churches consider the baptism to be valid. In Orthodoxy, the baptism occurred within the church's sacramental life, regardless of the personal theological errors of the minister. In the Catholic Church, a church official like the Pope may himself hold value in the act. However, Constantine's baptism is not officially disputed. All in all, Constantine is a man of many critics and admirers. His actions may have been morally questionable, but they were all justifiable, if the accounts are to be believed. His conversion to Christianity, either genuine or not, ushered in a new era with Christian values, which in some cases were more humane than the pagan ones. The killings of his son and wife were also probably a product of misunderstanding and tragedy, while his baptism is in many regards also a legitimate act. Does that make Constantine a moral person? Certainly, a man with such power would need to have the ability to dissociate from events and plan his grand strategy outside the borders of everyday life. In this world, morality is defined on a whole different level. What is to be said with certainty is that his actions cannot be classified as sadistic or cruel, and the results of his actions may have led to a general good. Concluding, Constantine was a man who acted based on the values and standards of Roman emperors. He seems to have appreciated tradition, as he did honor the old gods in many cases. He still held the post of Pontifex Maximus, he valued the honor of his family, at least in the Roman way, and attempted to expand the empire with grandiose plans of conquest in Dacia and Persia. At the same time, he was a pragmatic reformer. The change of capital and eventually the change of religion were acts of grand strategy, no matter the sincerity behind them. What Constantine eventually achieved was something much greater. He transformed Roman civilization as a whole, not just the empire. In a process that had already started throughout the 3rd century, Rome was no more a society obsessed with its past and traditions, but rather a force built to adapt to the needs of the times, and thus a force to survive for 1,000 more years to come.